The mafia boss paid off 12 months of rent for the single mom waitress. She still has no idea. New Cambria was a city drowning in a persistent gray drizzle. The rain clung to the windows of the Blue Comet, a 24/7 diner that smelled of stale coffee and industrial bleach. Lila Moreno, 27 years old, felt the dampness in her bones. She shifted her weight, the soles of her sneakers squeaking on the checkered floor as she cleared the last table of her shift. Her lower back throbbed, a dull ache from 8 hours of carrying plates and navigating the narrow aisles. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket. The screen lit up, illuminating the exhaustion etched around her eyes. A text message notification glowed, sharp and cruel. It was her landlord. The rent was past due, and his patience was gone. He was changing the locks. Tonight, at midnight. A cold spike of panic shot through Lila's chest. She thought of her son, Nico, 6 years old, asleep in their cramped, one-bedroom apartment, clutching the frayed strap of his favorite rocket ship backpack. He was alone. She had maybe an hour. The diner, usually noisy even this late, fell into a sudden, heavy silence. The clatter of forks stopped. The low hum of conversation died. Lila looked up from her phone. Outside, under the leaking neon sign of the Blue Comet, a procession of black SUVs glided to the curb. They were spotless, menacing, their tinted windows reflecting the city's wet misery. The doors opened, and men in dark suits emerged, flanking the entrance. His reputation was a cold draft that slid in before him. Giovanni Speranza. Even people who had never seen him knew the name. He was the shadow owner of the Speranza Syndicate, the man who held the city's docks and its politicians in his pocket. Lila watched through the glass, her breath fogging the pain, and he was taller than she expected, with broad shoulders that filled his dark wool coat. He moved with an unhurried grace, his head turning once to scan the street before he stepped inside. The diner held its breath. He did not take a booth. He slid onto a stool at the counter, placing his hands flat on the formica. Lila was technically still on the clock. She grabbed a mug, her hand shaking slightly, and approached him. "Coffee?" she asked. He looked up. His eyes were dark, and he held her gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. "Black," he said. His voice was low, a rumble of gravel, and a slice of the apple pie. She poured the coffee, her movements stiff. He was watching her hands. She set the pie down. He pushed a $100 bill across the counter. It was crisp, new, as if it had never been folded. He did not touch the pie. He just stared into the black coffee. At the register, Mel, the cashier, leaned toward Lila, whispering, "That's him. I heard the Ortegas hit his warehouse on the river tonight. Total loss. Fire." The Ortega outfit, the only syndicate in town brave enough or stupid enough to challenge Speranza. Lila just nodded, pocketing the meager tips from her shift, her mind only on the ticking clock. Midnight. A commotion near the door. A woman, dressed in an expensive-looking suit, had hurried out, leaving a thick manila envelope on the stool beside her. Lila, acting on autopilot, snatched it up. "Ma'am, you forgot this." She rushed toward the door, but her path was blocked. A man stepped out of the entryway shadows. He was large and a stark. Black compass rose was tattooed onto his neck, the points disappearing into his collar. "That's not yours," he said, his voice flat. Lila froze, clutching the envelope. A sharp sound cut through the tense diner. Tap, tap. Lila looked back. Giovanni Speranza was stirring his coffee. Though he had not added sugar, the small metal spoon hit the ceramic mug with a precise, measured rhythm, and he was not looking at them, but his gaze was angled toward the door. He slowly, deliberately, tapped the spoon one last time. The tattooed man's eyes flickered from Lila to Giovanni. A silent calculation passed across his face. He looked at Giovanni, then at the envelope in Lila's hand. He gave a curt nod, not to her, but toward the counter. Then he dissolved back into the rain. Lila was trembling, the adrenaline making her lightheaded. She didn't understand what had just happened, what silent order had been given and obeyed. She turned back to the counter, but Giovanni was already sliding the $100 bill toward the pie he hadn't eaten. "Keep it," he said, and walked out. The storm broke in earnest. The rain turned torrential. Hammering the roof, the lights in the blue comet flickered, buzzed, and flickered again. As if summoned by the chaos, the front doors burst open, and 2 men in city-issued windbreakers stormed in. "Urban Integrity Bureau," one of them shouted, flashing a badge. "Midnight license inspection. Nobody leaves." The atmosphere, already tense, snapped taut. The manager, a perpetually sweating man named Sal, began to panic. "Lila, you're good with the books, right in the office. Help me find the permits." Lila's heart sank. She didn't have time for this. "Sal, I have to go. My son." "Please, Lila, 5 minutes. They'll shut us down." Resigned, she hurried into the cramped back office. She dug through the filing cabinet, the smell of old paper and mildew filling her nose. She pulled out the thick binder labeled Property Contracts. As she searched for the diner's license, her eyes snagged on an invoice for the building's pest control. Her eyes scanned the page, and she saw it. The management company listed was not her landlord. The owner of record for her apartment building, the Slum on Mercer Street, was listed as Sunfield Mercy Trust. The name meant nothing to her, but it felt clean, sterile, horribly out of place. The UIB finished their sweep. It was 12:30. Lila ran. She sprinted the 6 blocks, the rain soaking her thin jacket, her lungs burning. She didn't care about the rent, she just needed Nico. She rounded the corner to her street. She saw her apartment door, number 4B. She jammed her key into the lock. It wouldn't go in. She tried again, panic rising like bile in her throat. The key met the new metal with a dead, final click. It was a new lock, silver, cheap, and solid. He had done it. He had locked her out. "Nico!" she screamed, hammering the flimsy door with her fists. "Nico!" No sound, just the rain. She backed away, frantic, scanning the building, the fire escape. She ran to the alley. The metal rungs were slick and cold. She climbed, her fingers numb, hauling herself up 4 floors. She prayed. She had always left the kitchen window unlocked, just in case. She reached the landing and pushed at the glass. It gave. She slid the window open and tumbled into the darkness of her tiny kitchen. He was there, asleep on the small cot in the living room, surrounded by her unmade bed and their few possessions. He was safe, stirring slightly, his hand clutching the torn strap of the rocket ship backpack. Relief washed over her, so total it almost buckled her knees, but it lasted only a second. They couldn't stay. The landlord would be back. He would call the police. Lila moved quickly. She found a dry blanket and wrapped Nico in it, lifting his warm, sleeping body into her arms. He mumbled, pressing his face into her neck, and slept on. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't grab her wallet. She just carried her son back to the window, climbed onto the fire escape, and carefully lowered herself back to the alley. Lila Moreno walked back into the streets of New Cambria, carrying her entire world. There was only one place to go that was dry, lit, and would ask no questions. She walked the 12 blocks to the public hospital, found a row of empty plastic chairs in the emergency room waiting area, and sat down. She held her son close, rocking him gently as she watched the rain lash against the reinforced glass. The plastic chairs of the hospital waiting room had left ridges in Lila's spine. She had dozed for maybe 30 minutes at a time, one arm locked around Nico, who had thankfully slept through the entire ordeal. At dawn, she'd woken him gently, used the public restroom to splash cold water on both their faces, and walked him to Suri's apartment, the only friend she trusted enough to ask. Suri, bleary-eyed and wrapped in a bathrobe, had taken one look at Lila's rain-soaked jacket and pale face and pulled them both inside. Lila arrived at the Blue Comet an hour before her shift, fueled by Suri's instant coffee and a cold knot of dread. She was going to have to beg Sal for an advance, maybe find a locksmith, and break into her own apartment. "You look like hell, Moreno," Suri said, tying on her own apron as Lila clocked in. "I got locked out. Lila muttered, scrubbing the coffee pot with unnecessary force. Landlord changed the locks. Nico and I. We slept at the hospital. Suri dropped a handful of spoons. What, Lila? No, you didn't hear. Hear what? Your landlord. He came by this morning, looking for you. Sal said he was all smiles. Said to tell you not to worry about the lock. Suri leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Lila, he said your account was paid, in full, for the entire year. Lila stopped scrubbing. The diner's noise seemed to fade. What did you say? Paid 12 months. He said the lock was just a security upgrade because the building was under new patronage. He left the new key for you with Sal. Lila's hands began to shake. It was a different kind of shaking than the exhaustion and cold from the night before. This was fear. She walked numbly to the manager's office. Sal, counting receipts, grunted and tossed her a single shiny key on a paper tag. And this came, Sal said, pushing a folded receipt across his desk, said you needed a copy for your records. Lila unfolded it. It wasn't a standard rent receipt. It was a formal notification of payment. The amount made her stomach lurch. And at the bottom, under payer of record. It didn't list her name. It listed 2 words, Sunfield Mercy Trust. She backed out of the office, the key feeling heavy and wrong in her palm. A whole year. Nobody did that. Not for a waitress in New Cambria. She thought of the men in the black SUVs. She thought of the quiet tap, tap, tap of the spoon against the mug. He came in at 10, just as the breakfast rush was dying. Giovanni Speranza slid onto the same stool, as if it were reserved for him. He was reading something on a tablet, his dark brow furrowed in concentration. Lila picked up the coffee pot. She walked over, her steps measured. She had to ask. She had to know. Coffee, she asked? Her voice was steady, but her hand was not. He nodded, not looking up. Black pie. She poured. The tremor in her hand was violent now, a product of 0 sleep and a terror so profound it vibrated in her muscles. A splash of hot coffee leaped from the cup, puddling on the saucer. Sorry, she mumbled, fumbling for a napkin. He finally looked up from the tablet. His gaze didn't land on her face. It locked onto her hand, watching the erratic shake as she tried to blot the spill. He said nothing, but his stillness made her feel exposed, dissected. She put the pie down and fled to the kitchen. An hour later, a man in a plain gray hoodie and a baseball cap pulled low entered the diner. He wasn't a customer. He was carrying a small, brown-wrapped parcel. Lila Moreno, he called out. Lila, wiping the counter, turned. That's me. He slid the package onto the counter and held out a digital scanner. Sign. I didn't order anything, she said, her suspicion growing. Don't know, the man said, bored. Just says Lila Moreno, Blue Comet Diner. Just sign. She scribbled her name. He left. Lila took the package to the break room. Suri followed her. Okay, what is going on? First the rent, now presents you holding out on me. Lila tore the paper. Inside was a sturdy box. She lifted the lid. It was a child's winter coat. It was a brilliant, rocket ship blue, with thick insulation and a soft fleece lining. It was new. It was expensive. It was Nico's exact size. Tucked into the pocket was a small, plain white card. The handwriting was neat, impersonal block letters. For Nico, from a kind stranger. A kind stranger, Lila whispered. The phrase felt like a lie. Wow, Suri said, touching the sleeve. This is quality. Okay, you definitely have a secret admirer, and he is rich. Suri's voice was loud, carrying out of the break room. Way to go, girl! Lila felt her stomach tighten. Out at the counter, Giovanni Speranza was looking toward the break room. He had heard. His expression was impossible to decipher, but as he turned back to his tablet, the corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a curve. She was interrupted mid-shift by the UIB, the same 2 agents, but their demeanor was different. No shouting, no midnight raids. They cornered her by the jukebox, their smiles thin and practiced. Miss Moreno, glad we caught you. The older one, Kincaid, said, We just have a few questions about a regular customer of yours. Lila's hands went still on her rag. We know he comes in here, often sits at the counter, dark hair, nice suits, has ties to certain organizations. Kincaid slid a photograph onto the sticky table. It was a grainy surveillance shot of Giovanni exiting this diner. Does he meet people here? Does he talk to you? We know he was here last night during the inspection. Lila thought of the man with the compass tattoo. She thought of the new coat in her locker and the paid-up rent that felt like a cage. He orders coffee, Lila said, her voice flat. I don't pay attention. Kincaid's smile faltered. A single mother, a young son. It's a tough city. Miss Moreno. A little cooperation goes a long way. Be smart. I have tables, Lila said, and turned her back on them. When she looked again, the agents were gone. So was Giovanni, and he hadn't left by the front door. She went to his stool. His pie was, once again, untouched. Tucked under the empty saucer was a $50 bill. That night, the new key worked. The apartment was cold and silent, but it was hers. For 12 months, the thought brought her no comfort. Nico was asleep, his new blue coat draped over the foot of his cot like a shield. Lila sat on the edge of her own mattress, trying to force her racing mind to shut down. A sound, a high-pitched electronic whine. It was coming from outside. Lila moved to the window, the same one she had climbed through just a day before. She parted the thin curtains. Her heart stopped. Hovering just outside the glass, maybe 10 feet back, was a drone. It was black, small, and its camera was obvious. A single, blinking red light pulsed in the darkness, staring directly at her, staring into her home. Mommy? Nico's voice was small with sleep and fear. What's that light? He scrambled out of his cot and ran to her, hiding his face in her legs. The drone didn't move. It just watched. Lila's fear turned instantly to rage. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. There is a drone outside my window. It's watching my son, 4B, Mercer Street. Please, send someone. The dispatcher sounded unimpressed. A drone, ma'am. We'll send a car when one is available. Lila knew what that meant. An hour? Maybe 2? She held Nico, her body rigid, staring at the red eye. 5 minutes passed, then she heard it. Boots in the hallway. Fast, heavy, and synchronized. Not cops. She peered through the peephole. The hallway was dark, but she could see them. 2 men, dressed in black tactical gear. No police markings, just a small gray patch on their arms are area response. They were already at the end of the hall, scanning the stairwell. A firm, quiet knock echoed on her door. It wasn't the police knock. Lila, holding Nico tight, unlatched the chain and opened the door a few inches. He was standing in the shadows of the opposite doorway, as if he had materialized from the peeling paint. Giovanni Speranza. He wasn't wearing a coat, just dark trousers and a dark wool sweater. His arms crossed. His eyes flicked from her face to the window behind her, where the buzzing sound had abruptly vanished. He stepped into the dim light of the hallway. Your window needs a flight screen, but he said, his voice a low rumble. I'll handle it. He had not moved from the shadows of the opposite wall. The ARE operatives who had flanked the hallway were already gone, vanishing as silently as they had arrived. This apartment is compromised, Giovanni said. It was not a suggestion. It was a statement of fact. My men traced the drone's signal. It's local. Ortega. Lila clutched Nico tighter, her knuckles white. So what you show up, and they scatter. They'll be back. They will, he agreed. He gestured with his chin toward the hallway. I have a unit available at the Rivet. It's a secure complex downtown. It's managed by the same trust that handles your lease. Lila stared at him, her pride stinging more than the cold air. The Rivet. She'd seen the ads for it. New, clean, expensive. Managed by Sunfield, she said, the name tasting like ash. Another gift. It's a transfer, he stated, ignoring her tone. For your safety, you and the boy can be there in 20 minutes. No. The word was out before she could think. Sharp and brittle. I'm not leaving. I'm not being moved around like your property. I just got this key back. This is my home." Giovanni watched her, his dark eyes unreadable. He seemed to be calculating, factoring her stubbornness into a larger equation. He gave a single, slow nod. "As you wish. The flight screen will be installed by morning. Do not open the door for anyone you do not know." He turned and was gone, leaving only the smell of damp wool and the cold silence of the hallway. 2 days later, the stress and the damp chill caught up with Nico. He woke at 2 in the morning with a high fever and a cough that sounded like a barking seal. Lila's blood ran cold. She knew that cough, croup or worse. She bundled him in the new blue coat, her mind racing. The emergency room at New Cambria Public meant an 8-hour wait, at best. She didn't have that time. She didn't have money for an urgent care clinic. She was halfway out the door, Nico whimpering against her shoulder. When she saw the car, it was one of the black SUVs, parked across the street, engine off, its presence a silent question. As she hesitated on the steps, the passenger door opened. It was not Giovanni, but one of the men who had been with him in the hallway. He approached her, stopping a respectful 10 feet away. He held out a small, stiff rectangle of cardstock. "What is this?" Lila demanded, shifting Nico in her arms. "He was informed the boy was unwell," the man said, his voice impersonal. "Doctor, Fen Hale, pediatrics. She runs a clinic on the west side. She will be expecting you." Lila looked at the card. It was simple, elegant, listing just a name and an address. "I can't afford a private doctor," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "The clinic is funded by a philanthropic grant," the man replied. "They do not send bills." He placed the card on the railing of the steps and retreated to the car. Lila stared at the card. She hated this. She hated the feeling of being watched, of being managed. She looked at Nico, his face flushed and hot against her neck. She grabbed the card and ran for the nearest bus stop. The UIB agents caught her during her shift. This time, Kincaid and her partner did not smile. They waited until Lila was taking a break in the alley, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. "You're making this hard, Lila," Kincaid said, stepping out from behind the dumpster, making Lila jump. "You're following me now." "We are building a case. The drone wasn't ours. That was the Ortega outfit. They think you're Speranza's new weakness. You're in the game, whether you like it or not." Kincaid took a drag from a cigarette. "We are offering you a way out. Become a temporary collaborator." "A snitch. A protected witness," Kincaid countered, her voice hard. "You see who he meets at the diner. You hear things. You report to us. In exchange, we give you full protective detail, a new apartment in a new city, a new life for you and your son. Guaranteed." Lila thought of the clinic. Doctor. Hale had been kind, efficient. The medicine was already working. "I have to think about it," she said, which was not a yes, but also not the no they expected. She threw her cup in the trash and walked past them. "I have to pick up my son from school." It was dusk, and the New Cambria rain was back, turning the sidewalks into black mirrors. Lila held Nico's hand, listening to him chatter about the astronaut poster doctor. Hale had given him... She felt the eyes on her before she saw them. A beat-up sedan, its muffler rattling, had been behind them for 3 blocks. It passed them, then pulled over abruptly at the corner, blocking their path. 2 men got out. They were not the polished, tactical muscle of Speranza's crew. These men were rough, wearing hoodies and an air of desperate menace. "Lila Moreno," one of them called out, smiling, showing stained teeth. "We just want to talk to you about your friend, the one who likes apple pie." Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. She scooped Nico up, turning to run, but the second man was already moving to cut her off. She was trapped between the men and the brick wall of a bodega. "Just tell us where he keeps his data," the first man said, stepping closer. "And the kid doesn't have to see this." "Leave us alone," Lila shouted, her voice shaking. The man lunged, grabbing for her arm. He never made it. A shadow detached itself from the crosswalk. Giovanni. He must have been walking, unseen, just paces behind them. He moved with a speed that was terrifying. He didn't punch. He didn't draw a weapon. He intercepted the first man's arm, rerouted his momentum, and twisted. There was a sickening, wet pop as the man's elbow dislocated. He screamed, dropping to his knees. The second man, startled, fumbled inside his jacket, pulling a switchblade. The blade snapped open, catching the dim streetlight. Giovanni closed the distance in a single step. He deflected the knife hand, his other hand chopping down on the man's wrist. The knife clattered on the pavement. Giovanni spun him, slamming him face first into the sedan. He applied pressure to the man's neck. It was fast, brutal, and horrifyingly silent. In less than 10 seconds, both men were incapacitated, groaning on the wet ground. Giovanni straightened his coat. He did not look at the men he had just broken. He looked at Lila. She was frozen, clutching Nico, who had buried his face in her shoulder. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps. The two worlds she had been trying to keep separate the life of a single mother and the dark, violent orbit of Giovanni Speranza had just collided on a wet street corner. The fear was still there, but it was now laced with a heavy, complex feeling of debt and a sharp, dangerous curiosity. "Get him home," Giovanni said, his voice low. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. The next day, a man in a clean polo shirt with a Sunfield logo embroidered on it came to her door. "Mandatory safety upgrade for all trust properties, ma'am." He installed a new smart smoke detector and a high-definition doorbell camera. Lila watched him work, a cold understanding dawning. It wasn't Sunfield. It was Giovanni. He was putting eyes on her door. 2 days later, her mailbox contained a small, plain white envelope. Inside, there was no note, just a single, black electronic key fob, smooth and anonymous. She held it in her palm, her fingers hesitating. It was a key, but she had no idea what it opened. "You look stressed, honey," Suri said at the diner, pouring them both a cup of coffee before the shift. "And don't think I haven't seen that fancy camera on your door, or the black car that sits on your block." "I don't know what to do. Suri." Suri leaned in, her voice dropping. "Then let me tell you what not to do. Stay away from him. Lila, the word on the street is that Speranza is looking for a new way to clean his money. And he's got his eye on the Blue Comet. They say he wants to buy it, turn it into a hub." The words hit Lila like a slap. A hub for money laundering. This diner, her job. It wasn't just about her anymore. She was becoming an accessory. That night, after Nico was asleep, Lila put the black key fob in her drawer. She sat down at her secondhand laptop. Her fear had finally been eclipsed by anger. She wasn't his project. She wasn't his pawn. She opened the city's public database. She typed Sunfield Mercy Trust. It was a maze of legal registrations, of numbered companies and post office boxes, but Lila was meticulous. She followed the paper trail, cross-referencing incorporation dates and listed agents. An hour in, a new name surfaced as the parent corporation, the one that funded Sunfield, Arclight Holdings. A quick search brought up the address. It was a glass and steel skyscraper in the financial district, the top floor. The same building she had seen Giovanni's motorcade parked outside of, the same building the UIB had photographed him entering. Lila closed the laptop. She knew where she had to go. The Arclight Holdings building was a shard of glass aimed at New Cambria's perpetually gray sky. Lila walked into the lobby, her diner sneakers silent on the marble floor. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of ozone. She felt out of place, a smudge on a clean pane of glass. She approached the front desk, a massive block of black granite presided over by a woman with hair pulled back so tightly it lifted her eyebrows. "Can I help you?" The woman's voice was as polished and cold as the desk. "I'm here to see someone about Arclight Holdings," Lila said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The woman's eyes flicked over Lila's worn jacket. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I'm afraid we don't accept walk-ins. You can leave your information." It was a dismissal. Lila's stubbornness flared. "I'm not leaving until I speak to someone about Sunfield Mercy Trust. It's urgent." The woman's expression tightened. She reached for the phone, her fingers hovering over a button labeled security. "That won't be necessary, Helen." The voice came from behind Lila. Giovanni Speranza stood by the elevator bank. He wasn't in his usual dark wool coat. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, but no tie, the collar of his white shirt open. He looked like he owned the building, which, Lila realized, he probably did. The security guard in the corner, who had been tensing, relaxed instantly. The receptionist looked flustered. Giovanni's eyes met Lila's. "You're shivering," he said. "It's cold out. Come, we'll have ginger tea." He didn't wait for her reply, just held a hand toward the open elevator. Lila, feeling the eyes of the lobby on her, stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing them in a silent brushed steel box. The elevator opened not into an office, but onto an enclosed rooftop terrace. It was a glass cube, battered by the wind and the rain, but offering a breathtaking, miserable view of the city. A few simple, elegant chairs were the only furniture. It was desolate and beautiful. "You found Arclight," he said, standing by the glass, looking down at the city. It wasn't hard," Lila said, crossing her arms. "Sunfield, Arclight, you. Why? Why the apartment? Why the doctor?" He turned to her. The sound of the wind was a low howl outside the glass. "I grew up in a place called St. Aurelia's, a temporary care facility. They called it. It was over on the industrial side, before they tore it down. My mother died there. I don't remember her face. I just remember the cold. The floors were always cold." He looked away, back to the rain-lashed city. "I never had a home, not a real one, so I build them. The Rivet, the clinic, Sunfield, they are just bricks. I'm fixing the cold floors, that's all." Lila absorbed this. It was more than she had ever expected. "That doesn't answer my question. Giovanni, the drone, the men at the corner, the UIB, they all think I belong to you. Why me?" He was silent for a long moment. The only sound, the drumming of the rain. "Someone is watching you to force me out into the open," he said, his voice quiet. "The Ortegas, they know I am vulnerable when I am distracted." "Why am I the distraction?" Lila insisted, her voice rising. "Why me?" He finally turned to face her fully. His dark eyes were intense, holding hers with a gravity that made it hard to breathe. "Because," he said, the words low and raw, "you make me stop." Before she could process what that meant, a dull, muffled whump echoed from far below. It wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the floor. Giovanni's head snapped toward the elevator. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, read the screen, and his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "What is it?" Lila asked. "A small explosion. Parking garage," he said, his voice clipped. "A diversion. The ARE team monitoring your son's school just reported a secondary team. They were checking his route, timing his exit." The blood drained from Lila's face. "Nico." "He's safe. My men have him. They are moving." He grabbed her elbow, his grip firm. "We're leaving." There was no SUV. A black, unassuming sedan was waiting in the garage. They drove in silence. Giovanni's jaw set, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. They didn't go to her apartment. They drove to an older, industrial part of the city, to a building that looked like a converted warehouse. He led her to a steel door, pressed his thumb to a scanner, and it clicked open. "Amber 5, and he said, pushing the door open. It was not a home. It was a concrete box, minimalist, clean with thick, soundproofed walls and no personal touches. Nico was sitting on a simple gray sofa, coloring in a book, one of Giovanni's RE operatives standing in the corner. "Mommy!" Nico ran to her, wrapping his arms around her legs. Lila hugged him fiercely, burying her face in his hair, her body trembling with delayed shock. "It's okay, mijo. We're okay." Nico pulled back and looked past her at Giovanni, who stood in the doorway, his suit jacket off, his shoulders tense. Nico's face was solemn, his eyes wide with a 6-year-old's simple, brutal clarity. "Are you a bad man?" Nico asked. Lila froze. She saw Giovanni's composure crack. For the first time, he looked lost. The authority vanished, replaced by a deep, aching vulnerability. He looked at Lila, his eyes asking a question she couldn't answer. Slowly, Giovanni walked over and knelt, crouching down so he was on eye level with her son. He didn't smile. "I do things that good men won't," Giovanni said, his voice soft, pitched only for the boy, so that good men, like your mom, can be safe. Nico considered this, like a monster that scares away the other monsters. A flicker of something pain, or maybe a shadow of a smile crossed Giovanni's face. Something like that. Now, I'm told there's a kitchen in here with ice cream. Later, after Nico was asleep on the sofa, Lila stood by the reinforced window. "Sunfield is paying my rent," she said quietly, not looking at him. "I know that much, but the receipt said an anonymous sponsor. I still don't know who." "Does it matter?" he asked from across the room. "It matters to me. I don't like being in debt." "Then don't be," he said. "This isn't a debt, it's a fact. Let the gratitude, or the anger, come last. Just be safe first." Her phone, which had been silent, buzzed on the counter, a text from an unknown number. It was a PDF. She opened it. The seal of the city of New Cambria, a summons. She was being compelled to appear before the Urban Integrity Bureau. The deadline was 48 hours. "They're done asking," Lila whispered. "They sent the summons." "You need a lawyer," Giovanni said immediately. "I have one. Her name is Rhea Quill. She will handle it." Lila laughed, a short, bitter sound. "And that's it. I just hide in your concrete box and let your lawyer handle me. I am not selling myself to your world. Giovanni, I won't be one of your assets." He walked toward her, stopping just an arm's length away. The intensity was back, but it was mixed with a profound sadness. "You aren't selling anything, Lila," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're choosing the price for your son's peace. They've made their move. Now you have to make yours." He left her there, the ARE operative standing guard outside the steel door. She stayed the night, listening to the muffled silence of the safe house. In the morning, the ARE operative drove her to the Blue Comet for her shift. She worked on autopilot, her mind 1,000 miles away. When her shift ended, she didn't go back to the safe house. She went to her own apartment, the one with the new camera on the door. She walked to her drawer and took out the small, black, anonymous key fob he had sent. She stared at it. It was a link. It was a choice. Lila closed her fist around it, the smooth plastic warming to her skin, and slipped it into her pocket. The interrogation room at the Urban Integrity Bureau was painted a pale, sickly green. It smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic indifference. Lila sat at the metal table, her hands clasped in her lap. May Kincaid walked in, her face set in a look of grim impatience. She dropped a file on the table between them. It wasn't a threat. It was an education. "We know you've been summoned," Kincaid said, flipping open the file. "So let's skip the pleasantries." She slid a photograph across the table. It was a man, slumped over the steering wheel of a bakery van, his uniform stained dark. Ramon Gutierrez, father of 2. The Ortega outfit mistook his van for a Speranza drop. They didn't ask questions. She slid another, a storefront, the glass shattered. Maria Velez worked at this dry cleaner. An Ortega enforcer threw a rival through that window. Maria was just ringing up a customer. Her son was waiting by the door. Lila pushed the photos back. "I don't know these people. This has nothing to do with me." "It has everything to do with you," Kincaid snapped, her voice as hard as the tabletop. "This is the city. Miss Moreno, this is the choice. You have a son. You want him growing up in a city run by the Ortegas or by Speranza, because I promise you, they are the same animal, just different uniforms." Kincaid leaned in, her voice dropping. We know Arclight Holdings is having some charity event at the Blue Comet in 2 days, a PR stunt. We also know Giovanni Speranza will be there. She slid a small, sealed evidence bag across the table. Inside was a black disc, no bigger than a dime. You plant this under his favorite booth, Booth 4. In exchange, the summons vanishes. We provide guaranteed housing, fully subsidized, and a full scholarship for your son, anywhere in the country. You and Nico get a clean slate. And if I don't? Lila whispered. If you don't, I charge you with obstruction of a federal investigation. I tie you to Sunfield Mercy Trust, and I make your life hell. You'll lose your job, and with a record, you might just lose your son. Lila stared at the small black disc. It was a way out, a complete, clean exit. But it was also a betrayal that made her stomach clench. I need to think about it. You have until the event, Kincaid said, standing. Don't make the wrong choice. Lila walked home in a daze, Kincaid's words echoing in her ears. A new life, a scholarship, freedom. When she got to her apartment, another package was leaning against her door. It was a thick document mailer, stiff and official. No return address. She sat on her cot and tore it open. Her breath hitched. It was a copy of her lease agreement, her name, her apartment number, and stamped across every page in stark red ink, paid in full. The term was listed 12 months. The lesser was Sunfield Mercy Trust. The signature line for the payer was a digital, automated authorization. It was real. It wasn't just a favor. It was a contract, a fact set in ink, a chain, link by link, wrapped around her. Mommy, look! Nico ran out of his small room, his eyes bright. He was waving a colorful ticket. The man from the diner was here, the one who gave me the coat. Lila's heart jumped. What man when? Nico, he was here. No, silly. Nico laughed. He was at the diner when I was with Suri. She let me have pie, and the man gave me this. Lila took the ticket from his hand. It was for the Space Harbor Museum, decorated with illustrations of planets and astronauts. She turned it over. On the back, written in the same neat, impersonal block lettering as the note with the coat, were 4 words. Space Harbor Museum, 10 a.m. It was not an invitation. It was a counter summons. The museum was loud, the vast main hall filled with the echoing shouts of children on field trips. Nico was electric, vibrating with excitement, pulling her from the mock-up of a moon rock to the towering fuselage of a decommissioned rocket. Lila let him lead, her eyes scanning, her nerves stretched thin. She saw him, and he was standing 3 exhibits away, by a topographical map of Mars. Giovanni Speranza, in a dark gray sweater, his hands in his pockets, looked like any other father on a weekday morning. He was not looking at her. He was watching Nico, his expression distant. He made no move to approach, simply maintained his orbit, separated by a silent, unbridgeable gulf of screaming children. Nico darted toward the centerpiece, a full-scale replica of a space shuttle cockpit. Mommy, come on, let's fly it. He climbed into the pilot's seat. Lila slid into the co-pilot's chair, the small space smelling of plastic and disinfectant. A shadow filled the narrow doorway. Giovanni slid into the navigator's seat just behind her. The space was suddenly tight, intimate. The sounds of the museum outside faded, muffled by the thick plastic. The UIB offered you a deal, he said. His voice was a low murmur, not meant to carry. Lila kept her eyes forward, pretending to study the fake controls. They want me to plant a bug at the diner. I know, he said. Kincaid doesn't want justice. She wants a win. She wants to use you to lump me in with Ortega, to seize Arclight's legitimate assets under the pretense of a RICO case. She wants to burn the whole thing down. She offered me a way out, Lila whispered. A new life for Nico. She offered you a different cage. Anger, sharp and hot, cut through her fear. She turned in the small seat to face him. And what are you offering a paid lease I never asked for? A camera on my door. Your men following my son. I will not cover up crimes. Giovanni, not for them, and not for you. His dark eyes met hers. The cold calculation she was used to was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. I am not asking for forgiveness, Lila. I am asking for fairness. The Blue Comet is a diner. Kincaid wants to make it a crime scene. She wants to take you down with it. This was it, her leverage, the only power she had. Then give me fairness, she demanded, her voice shaking but gaining strength. Get out of the Blue Comet. Stop whatever gray business you're doing there. I want it clean, completely. And I want you to sell it. Not to Arclight, not to Sunfield, to Sal, or someone who just wants to run a diner. I want my job to be just a job. He studied her face, the defiant set of her jaw. He seemed to be weighing the cost. He gave a single, slow nod. 7 days. It will be done. Mommy, blast off, Nico yelled, slamming his small fist onto a large red button. A synthesized countdown blasted through the cockpit speakers. Lila turned back. The navigator's seat was empty. Giovanni was gone. She left the museum holding Nico's hand, her mind a battlefield. Kincaid's deadline was in 2 days. Giovanni's promise was for 7. Her steps, without conscious thought, had taken her toward the Rivet, the new, secure apartment complex, the one he had offered her, the one managed by Sunfield. In her pocket, her fingers found the anonymous black key fob. She walked into the pristine lobby, past the doorman, and to the elevator bank. She held the fob to the security panel. The light flashed green. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed the button for the 3rd floor. She walked to apartment 3B. The hallway was silent. She held the fob to the lock. A quiet, electronic snick. The door swung open. The apartment was small, but it was perfect. Clean, modern, and flooded with sunlight. The large window overlooked a park, 2 blocks away. She could see the chain-link fence of Nico's school playground. It was furnished. A simple sofa, a small table, a bed already made. Numbly, she walked into the galley kitchen. She pulled open the refrigerator. Inside, on the top shelf, was a carton of organic milk, a clear plastic clamshell of fresh strawberries, and a small, insulated lunch bag. Taped to the milk carton was a note, the same neat, block handwriting. Nico needs calcium. Lila leaned her head against the cold steel of the refrigerator. It was too much. The rent, the doctor, the coat, and now this, a sanctuary, stocked with his favorite food. This wasn't a transaction. This was care. She covered her mouth as a sob, hot and heavy, tore through her. She slid down the side of the refrigerator until she was sitting on the clean tile floor. She cried, not in fear, but in a profound, terrifying confusion. The lease had a machine signature. The notes were unsigned. She was drowning in his protection. But the central promise of the story remained broken. She still had no idea who, exactly, was paying for it all. The storm broke with a vengeance, clawing at New Cambria with a wind that sounded almost human. Lila was in her old apartment on Mercer Street, packing the last of Nico's toys. She hadn't fully moved to the Rivet. It felt too final, too much like accepting a life she hadn't chosen. Then the lights in the building buzzed, flickered, and died, plunging the room into a thick, oppressive darkness. The hallway went silent. Nico, who'd been dozing on his cot, whimpered. "It's okay, mijo," Lila said, her voice sounding too loud in the sudden quiet. "Just the wind." But it wasn't just the wind. The building's ancient systems had failed, and the cold was already seeping through the thin walls. She had to get Nico to the Rivet. She fumbled for her phone, its light a weak beacon, and dialed a rideshare, but the network was down. She was bundling Nico into his coat when a pair of headlights cut through the rain-lashed street below, illuminating the room in a brief, sweeping glare. A car door slammed. Moments later, there was a firm, heavy knock on her door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't her landlord. Lila opened it. Giovanni Speranza stood in the dark hallway, his form backlit by the emergency light from the stairwell. His expensive wool coat was soaked through, plastered to his shoulders. Rain dripped from his dark hair onto the peeling linoleum. He He had driven himself. No driver, no heirs, just him. "The power is out for the whole block," Anhi said, his voice a low rumble. "The grid is down. You need to leave." "I was just—" Lila stammered, holding Nico close. Giovanni didn't wait. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small, cold room. He looked at Nico, who was blinking sleepily, and his expression softened. "He's asleep." He gently, expertly, scooped Nico from her arms. Nico, accustomed to the chaos, just mumbled and burrowed his face into the damp wool of Giovanni's coat. Giovanni wrapped the boy securely in the blanket from the cot and headed for the door. "Bring what you need. I'll take him to the car." Lila grabbed her bag and Nico's rocket ship backpack and followed him down the dark, cold stairs. He settled Nico into the back seat of the sedan, buckling him in with a surprising gentleness. He drove them to Rivet 3. The building was on its own generator, the lobby warm and bright. The apartment was a sanctuary, insulated from the howl of the storm outside. Giovanni placed Nico on the sofa, where the boy instantly curled up and fell back asleep. The apartment was dark, lit only by the distant, flickering lights of the city. Lila's hands were shaking, from the cold, from the adrenaline, from his sheer, overwhelming presence in this space. "I'll make tea," she said, "just to have something to do." He shed his soaked coat, leaving it by the door, and he was in a dark sweater, the one she'd seen him in at the museum. He followed her into the small kitchen area and sat at the counter, watching her. Lila's hands trembled as she tried to fill the kettle. The silence was charged, broken only by the wind and rain beating against the glass. Giovanni reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at it, then deliberately. He placed it screen down on the counter. A gesture of trust. An unarmed man. "You're afraid," he stated. "I'm cold," she countered, fumbling with the tea bags. "You're soaked. You should have moved here last week. Lila, that place isn't safe." "This place isn't mine," she said, her voice sharp. "None of it is. The lease, this apartment, the food in the fridge, it's all temporary. It's all yours." He looked down at his hands, clasped on the counter. "I've never been good at things that last. Aurelia's taught me that everything is temporary. Shelter, food, people. You learn to let go before they're taken." Lila stopped, the kettle in her hand. "Is that what I am? Giovanni, something temporary?" He looked up, and his gaze was so raw it almost made her step back. "No, you're the opposite. No, anse." He paused, searching for the words. "I'm afraid of being needed. It's a weakness. It gives people leverage. And I'm afraid of being indebted," she whispered. "It's a cage." A deafening crack of thunder shook the building, a percussive boom that rattled the windows in their frames. Lila startled, a small cry escaping her, and her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist as if for balance. His skin was warm, his pulse, strong and steady, beat against her palm. He went perfectly still. The energy in the small kitchen shifted, coalescing around that single point of contact. He didn't pull away. He simply waited. His eyes locked on her, watching her, reading her. Slowly, as if asking permission. He turned his hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "Lila," he breathed. He stood, not releasing her hand, and gently tugged her from the kitchen. He drew her into the dark living room, stopping in the shadows, away from the window. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the rain and the clean, sharp scent of his skin. He lifted his other hand not to grab her, but to rest, palm flat, against the side of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was hesitant, respectful, but it sent a shockwave through her. "Is this okay?" he whispered in, his voice rough. She couldn't speak. She just leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. It was an answer. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, drawing her against his chest. It was not a desperate grab, it was a gathering. She felt his heart hammering against her own, a fast, frantic rhythm that matched hers. He bent his head, not to her lips, but to her forehead, pressing a long, warm kiss there. He kissed her temple, then the sharp, high line of her cheekbone. His breathing was unsteady, his chest rising and falling against hers. His hands slid from her waist to her back, splayed wide, holding her, supporting her, grounding her. Lila's hands, which had been pressed against his chest, slid upward, her fingers tangling in the damp wool of his sweater, then finding their way into the thick, soft hair at the nape of his neck. She tilted her head back, a silent invitation. "Yes," she whispered, "but not fast." "I'll wait," he murmured against her skin. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other in the storm-lit darkness, learning the shape and feel of each other. It was an embrace that was less about passion and more about an aching, profound need for anchor. Later, they lay side by side on the sofa, Nico still breathing deeply on the floor cushions they'd moved. They stared at the ceiling, where the reflections of the rain on the window cast shifting, watery shadows. "The peach hair clip," he said, his voice quiet in the dark. "What?" "At St. Aurelia's, my mother had this one thing, a small, peach-colored plastic hair clip. She wore it every day. When she died, it was the only thing they gave me." It was quiet for a moment. "I keep it in a box. It's the only thing I have that's real." Lila listened to the vulnerability, a side of him she never knew existed. She turned her head on the cushion. In the dim light, she saw a small, pale line on his skin, just above the collar of his sweater, a scar. She reached out, her fingers lightly tracing it. "What's this?" He didn't flinch. A small, sad smile touched his lips. That was the only time I didn't run fast enough, a lesson I learned early. She moved her fingers from the scar to his face, her touch light. He turned his head, kissing her palm. When Lila woke, the storm had passed, and the first gray light of dawn was filling the apartment. The sofa was empty. Nico was still asleep on the floor, covered in Giovanni's dry wool coat. She sat up. He was gone. She went to the kitchen. On the counter, next to her keys, was a sandwich. It was clumsily wrapped in a paper towel. It looked like he had made it himself. The bread uneven, the meat sticking out. Beside it was a piece of paper torn from a notepad, the same neat, block handwriting. "May Monday pass quickly." Lila picked up the sandwich, a slow smile spreading across her face, but the smile faded as she looked around the clean, safe, expensive apartment. Her heart felt heavy. The closer she got to the man, the more terrifying the secret of the 12 months of rent became. The ArcLight charity event was a jarring sight. The blue comet, usually smelling of grease and bleach, was filled with flowers. A large ArcLight Holdings Community Fund banner hung over the pie case. Lila was late. She had meant to be. She walked in just after 7, her heart pounding, the small, dime-sized audio bug from Agent Kincaid feeling heavy as lead in her jeans pocket. She had no intention of planting it. She saw Giovanni near the back booth. He looked deeply uncomfortable, his tailored suit too formal for the diner, his shoulders rigid as he made polite conversation with Sal. Lila grabbed an apron, trying to look busy, when she saw Kincaid's unmarked sedan parked across the street, watching. The night exploded in an instant. A series of sharp, electronic pops came from the street, followed by the screech of tires and the crunch of metal. Everyone in the diner rushed to the window. The main intersection was chaos. The traffic lights were all flashing green. A 3-car pileup blocked the street. Giovanni's phone buzzed. One of his ARE operatives leaned in, speaking low and fast. "Sir, it's a diversion. The archive is being hit." Lila watched Giovanni's face harden. The data archive. The ArcLight building across the street. "They lured us out," Giovanni said, his voice deadly quiet. He and his 2-man detail moved toward the door. "Giovanni, wait!" Lila called out, but he was already gone, jogging across the street toward the archive building, his men flanking him. It was a trap. Lila knew it. Kincaid, still in her car, was on her radio, a thin smile on her face. At the same moment, 2 black vans, not Speranza's, peeled around the corner, blocking the archive's back alley. Ortega. Lila's phone vibrated in her hand. She looked down. It was an alert from the smart doorbell camera at her Rivet apartment, but it wasn't a motion alert. The screen was awash of pixelated static, with one word flashing signal interference. She looked from the static on her phone to the trap unfolding across the street. They were using some kind of signal jammer, a coordinated electronic attack, UIB and Ortega, a pincer movement, and Giovanni had just walked right into the jaws. Lila dropped her apron and ran. She burst out of the diner, ignoring Sal's shout. The rain was cold, plastering her hair to her face in seconds. She sprinted across the street, dodging the stalled traffic. She saw Giovanni and his men disappear through the archive's glass doors. The Ortega vans had disgorged 8, maybe 10 men, who were now storming the building's rear entrance. Kincaid's UIB agents were moving in, setting up a perimeter. Lila didn't stop. She ran past the front doors to the side alley. She knew this building. She had researched it. She saw what she was looking for: a red wall-mounted panel, manual fire suppression pull station, server rooms. She grabbed the handle and pulled down with all her weight. A deafening alarm split the night. For a second, nothing happened. Then, from vents inside the lobby and the floors above, a thick white foam began to spray. Hissing as it expanded, it was a high-expansion system designed to suffocate a fire without water. It was also a perfect visual screen. Lila ducked into the building, the foam already knee-deep and rising. It was disorienting, like being inside a cloud. Alarms blared. She heard shouting, confused yells from Ortega's men, angry commands from the UIB. "Giovanni!" she screamed, her voice muffled by the foam. She collided with a solid body, a hand clamped over her mouth, another grabbing her arm, slamming her against the wall. "Lila, what the hell are you doing here?" It was his voice. He pulled her close, his other hand clutching a small, green, external hard drive. "This way. The system's on a loop. We have 2 minutes." He knew the building's layout by heart. He pulled her through a side door marked Technical Access and into a narrow, steel stairwell. The foam was already seeping under the door. They were all working together. Lila panted, her lungs burning. "Kincaid set me up," he said, his voice a low growl. They ran up the echoing metal stairs, pushing through the door to the 3rd-floor fire escape. They burst out onto the metal landing, into the driving rain. They were high above the alley, but they were trapped. Below them, 3 of Ortega's men were on the ladder, climbing. "Freeze UIB." Lila looked up. May Kincaid stood on the landing above them, her rain-soaked jacket flapping. 2 agents flanked her, weapons raised. "It's over, Speranza," Kincaid yelled over the storm. "Nowhere to go." Her eyes fixed on the green drive in Giovanni's hand. "That's what I want. That's all I want. The network data. Give it to me," she shouted, "and I let you both walk. My case is with you, not her." Lila looked at Giovanni. He was bleeding from a graze on his temple where one of the agents must have clipped him. His chest was heaving. If he gave Kincaid that drive, his entire network, legitimate and otherwise Sunfield, Arclight, all of it would be exposed, seized. If he didn't, they would be arrested, or worse, caught in the crossfire with Ortega. Lila saw it. Bolted to the brick wall of the landing was a red fire extinguisher. Before Giovanni could make his choice, Lila acted. She grabbed the heavy extinguisher from its mount. "You want it, May!" Lila screamed, her voice raw with fury. She swung the steel canister, smashing it against the green hard drive in Giovanni's hand. He cried out, startled, and dropped it. The drive clattered onto the metal grating. "Lila, no!" Giovanni yelled. "You destroyed evidence!" Kincaid shrieked. "What evidence?" Lila yelled back. She raised the extinguisher high and brought it down on the drive. A loud crack echoed in the alley. The plastic casing shattered. She smashed it again, and the green circuit board inside split in 2. With a final, desperate kick, she sent the glittering fragments scattering through the grating, disappearing into the dark, foam-filled alley below. A stunned silence fell. Kincaid's face was a mask of pure, uncontrolled rage. The Ortega men below, seeing their prize destroyed, started shouting and retreating. The objective was gone. From the mouth of the alley, Giovanni's R team finally broke through, their black SUVs slamming into Ortega's vans. Giovanni stared at Lila, his eyes wide with disbelief. He grabbed her hand. "Now," he said. He pulled her, and they scrambled down the fire escape, pushing past the now confused UIB agents. They hit the alley floor running. Giovanni didn't let go of her hand. He pulled her tight against his side, shielding her with his body as his AR team provided cover. They ran, together, disappearing into the labyrinth of New Cambria's wet, dark streets. That night, in the warm, dry safety of Rivet 3, he sat on the sofa while she cleaned the cut on his temple with a first aid kit. He was silent, but he never stopped looking at her. It was a new look. The calculation was gone. The distance was gone. He was looking at her as if he had never truly seen her before, with a stunned, profound pride and an equal measure of complete and utter confusion. May Kincaid cornered her the next morning, not at the UIB office, but in the alley behind the Blue Comet as Lila was arriving for her shift. Kincaid's face was pale, her rage a low, simmering fire. "Obstruction of a federal investigation," Kincaid hissed, close enough for Lila to smell the stale coffee on her breath. "Destruction of evidence. Those are felonies. Miss Moreno, you just threw your life away for him." "You had no warrant for that drive," Lila said, her hands in her pockets, refusing to be intimidated. "You were making a back-alley deal. That's not justice." "Oh, you think you're a lawyer now?" Kincaid laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "You may have burned my primary evidence, but this isn't over. We still have a way into Sunfield. We can still seize every asset, including your precious new apartment. You just picked the losing side." Kincaid stepped back, her eyes promising a long, slow war. "Enjoy your 30 pieces of silver." Lila worked her shift in a fog, Kincaid's threat echoing in her ears. She felt exposed, vulnerable. When she finally returned to Rivet 3, she was exhausted. A plain manila envelope was on her doormat. It had no stamp. It had been hand-delivered. Her hands trembled as she opened it. It wasn't a threat from Kincaid. It was a stack of legal documents, a contract of sale. She read the title, her breath catching. Bill of sale and transfer of title, the Blue Comet Diner. Her eyes scanned the page. The seller was listed as Arclight Holdings. The buyer was a new LLC she had never heard of. Registered to Sal, the date of the sale was today. Lila sank onto the sofa. She counted the days. It had been exactly 7 days since their meeting in the space shuttle cockpit. He had kept his promise. He had cut the diner loose, cleansed it, and sold it to Sal. Free and clear of any syndicate ties, her job was just a job again. The relief was so profound it made her dizzy. He came that night. He didn't knock. She heard the quiet, electronic snick of the lock, a sound that should have terrified her, but didn't. He walked in, wearing a dark suit, looking tired. He saw the papers on the coffee table. "It's done," Lila stated. "I keep my word," he said. "Now it's your turn," she said, standing to face him. "No more half-truths, no more riddles about cold floors. What is Sunfield? What is it to you?" He was silent for a long moment, studying her, as if deciding what level of truth she was ready for. "It is what I said," he answered, his voice low. "A series of charitable funds, a network. I founded them, I fund them." "How, with money from the other side from the docks?" "Yes," he said, without apology. "Some of it. I set them up to fix some of the wrongs, to build things. It's not enough to just break things. You need to build." He looked around the apartment. "This is one of the good things." Lila processed this. It was an admission, a confession of a different kind. "I was there last night. Giovanni, I was in your world. I saw the violence. I destroyed evidence to save you." "I know," he said, his voice raw. "Never again," she said, her voice shaking but hard as steel. "I am not your soldier. I am not your partner in that. That 10% of your life. I need a boundary, a firewall. Me and Nico. We stay on this side, the side that builds. He met her gaze. She was not asking for permission. She was dictating terms. He gave a slow, deep nod. You will have it. I'll have Rhea Quill draw up a protection agreement. She will represent your interests, independent of mine. She will be the firewall. My world will not touch you again unless you invite it. The agreement hung in the air, a new kind of contract. Mommy Nico padded out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes, his rocket ship pajamas on. He saw Giovanni and blinked, still half asleep. Hey, mijo, Lila said softly. Nico walked over, not to Lila, but to Giovanni. He held up a piece of folded construction paper. I made this. Giovanni looked down at the offering, completely bewildered. He was a man who understood threats, money, and violence. He had no idea what to do with a child's gift. He slowly took the paper. It was a lopsided, three-dimensional rocket, held together with too much glue. It's for you, Nico said, to scare the monsters. Giovanni stared at the paper rocket as if it were a bomb. He cleared his throat. Thank you. He didn't know where to put it. Carefully, awkwardly. He folded the lopsided paper and slid it into the inside breast pocket of his expensive suit. The paper made a crumpling sound, a small, innocent bulk against his ribs. But the world, once stirred, did not settle easily. Ortega was humiliated. They had lost men, lost their target, and lost face. They couldn't hit Giovanni's ironclad operation, so they struck at the only place he was soft. They struck at Lila. They didn't use knives. They used whispers. You've heard right, Suri said, cornering Lila by the coffee machine at the newly sold blue Comet. It's all over the neighborhood. The talk. What talk? Lila asked, her stomach tightening. That Speranza is your sponsor. That you're his kept woman. That he bought you that fancy apartment at the Rivet, and that's why you're suddenly safe. The next day, at Nico's school, it became real. Lila was waiting by the gate, another mother, a woman Lila had exchanged pleasant smiles with for months. Saw her. The woman's face hardened. She visibly steered her own son away, her eyes raking over Lila with a look of pure, toxic judgment. Lila flinched, the color draining from her face. Suri, who had walked with her, grabbed her arm. Hey, do not look at her. She's nobody. She doesn't know the truth. Let's get Nico and go. Giovanni heard the rumors that night. He arrived at her apartment, and for the first time, she saw him truly angry. He wasn't cold. He was hot, pacing the small living room. This is Ortega's filth. They attack your name because they cannot attack me, he growled. I will not have it. I will not have them disrespecting you. What can you do? Lila asked, weary. Send your men to break their arms. It will just prove them right. No, he said, stopping. We will end it. The Sunfield Mercy Gala is next week. You will come, as my guest. We will walk in the front door, together. We will make it official. They will not dare whisper about a woman I publicly honor. Lila looked at him. His solution, from his world, was a show of power, a declaration of ownership. It was meant to protect. It felt like a cage. And what will that make me, Giovanni? She asked quietly. It won't stop the whispers. It will just prove them right. The mafia boss and his mistress. I'll be a headline. I won't be protected. I will be defined. He stared at her, his anger draining, replaced by frustration. Then what do I do? Lila, how do I fight this for you? You don't, Mushy said, meeting his gaze. This is my name. This is my honor. Not yet. Let me stand on my own. He left, respecting her wish, but she could feel his contained fury radiating in the hallway. Lila leaned against the locked door. She had faced down the UIB. She had destroyed Ortega's prize. She had set boundaries with the most powerful man in the city. She looked around the beautiful, safe apartment, her hand resting on the smooth granite counter. She had fought for her independence, but as she stood there, the recipient of his strange, violent, and tender protection, she realized she had never, not once, asked the question that had started it all. She still had no idea why he had paid 12 months of rent for a stranger in a diner before he had ever truly spoken to her. The biggest secret of all remained. The piece was a thin sheet of ice, and it cracked the moment Suri went missing. She was supposed to meet Lila for coffee after her shift at the Blue Comet. She never arrived. Lila's texts went unanswered, the small delivered notification staring back at her, mocking. Lila went to Suri's apartment. The door was unlocked, the cheap wood of the jamb splintered by a boot. Suri's keys and her phone were on the kitchen floor, discarded, beside them, a single, muddy footprint. Lila ran back to Rivet 3, her heart hammering a frantic, sick rhythm. She was locking the deadbolt when her phone rang, the screen flashing unknown number. She snatched it up. Hello? Lila Moreno. The voice was a digitized buzz, scraped clean of all humanity. Your friend is enjoying the fresh air. She's visiting Pier Lumen. Lila's blood turned to ice. What do you want? Sunfield. The voice crackled. We know it's his bank. We know you're the key. We want the list, the real list, all the donors, all the accounts. I don't have that, Lila insisted, her voice trembling. I'm just a waitress. You're his property. You have access. We saw you at ArcLight. We know about Rivet 3. You have a volunteer portal. You'll log in. The voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Tonight, Pier Lumen, midnight, come alone. If we see a shadow, if we see a ghost, your friend goes in the water. The line clicked dead. Her first instinct was to call Giovanni. He would fix this. He would bring fire and steel. He would unleash his men, and the pier would run with blood, and Suri, her kind, innocent friend, would be caught in the middle. The thought of that violence, a war started in her name, made Lila physically ill. No, she had demanded a firewall. She had demanded her world be separate. Suri was in her world. This was her fight. She remembered the small, heavy, anonymous key Giovanni had pressed into her hand after the archive incident. For emergencies, he had said. It opens the standard ARE kits in the Rivet service closets. She went to the utility closet at the end of the hall. The key worked, inside. Nestled next to a circuit breaker was a black duffel bag. She opened it. No gun. Just a heavy, rolled Kevlar vest, a high-lumen flashlight, a medical kit, 2 emergency road flares, and a single, thick zip tie restraint. She strapped the vest on under her jacket. It was heavy, restrictive, and felt like a terrible mistake. She grabbed a flare and left. Pier Lumen was a rotting spine of wood stretching into the black, churning water of the new Cambria Channel. The wind was a physical force, screaming in off the ocean, tasting of salt and industrial decay. She saw them at the far end of the pier, 4 men, silhouettes against the meager lights of the far shore. And Suri, she was tied to a piling, her mouth gagged, shivering violently. The leader stepped forward. It was the man from the street corner, the one whose elbow Giovanni had dislocated. His arm was in a dirty sling, his face twisted in a mask of pain and hatred. You came, smart girl. He shoved a laptop into her hands. Log in. The Sunfield volunteer portal. We know you have an account. You filed a repair request from your old apartment. We traced it. Now, log in and pull the master donor ledger. I don't have that kind of access, Lila stammered, her fingers numb, fumbling with the trackpad. I just asked for a plumber. Liar! He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Get us the list or she goes in. She's telling the truth. The voice was not digitized. It was deep, calm, and cut through the wind. Lila's head snapped toward the shore. Giovanni stood at the entrance to the pier. He was not alone, but he was not flanked by ARE operatives. He stood beside Rhea Quill, his lawyer, who clutched a briefcase. Beside her stood an older, severe-looking man in a federal windbreaker. The Ortega leader laughed, a high, panicked sound. He pulled a pistol from his waistband and pressed it to Suri's temple. Speranza, what is this? You brought a lawyer to a war. That, Giovanni said, his voice amplified by the wind, is Agent Thorne of the Interstate Integrity Commission, and this is Miss Quill, lead counsel for the Sunfield Mercy Trust. You are currently holding a hostage in an attempt to extort a federally registered interstate charitable organization. That's a minimum of 20 years. Before we even discuss the kidnapping. The leader's face went pale. It was a legal trap. Giovanni hadn't brought soldiers. He had brought the government. Ortega's man panicked. He was cornered, outmatched, and facing federal time. "You think you're clever," he screamed, his voice cracking. He shoved Suri to the wooden planks and raised his pistol, not at the hostage, but at the source of his humiliation. He fired twice. Giovanni moved, shoving Rhea and Agent Thorne behind a stack of rusted lobster pots. He was wearing a heavy overcoat, and he turned as the shots cracked. The bullets hit him, one high on the shoulder, one impacting his chest. He grunted, stumbling back, the force staggering him. He didn't fall. The coat concealed the vest, but the shoulder hit was real. Dark blood immediately soaked the wool. Lila didn't think. She didn't plan. She saw Giovanni hit. She saw Suri scrambling to safety. She saw the gunman raising his pistol again. She ripped the flare from her pocket, tore off the cap, and scraped the striker. It ignited with a furious, blinding hiss, erupting in a chemical blaze that bathed the pier in a pulsating, hellish red light. The gunman, his eyes adjusted to the dark, cried out, blinded. "Oh, my eyes!" Lila charged, screaming a raw, ragged sound, holding the burning flare out like a torch. "Get away from him!" The gunman, disoriented, fired wildly into the darkness. An ARE operative, materializing from the shadows under the pier where Giovanni had positioned his real backup, slammed into the gunman from the side. They both hit the deck. As the man struggled, Lila was on him, pressing the intensely hot flare toward his face. He flinched, shielding his eyes, dropping the pistol. The ARE operative snapped the zip tie around his wrists. It was over. Sirens wailed, loud and close. This time they were real. May Kincaid was the first of the local police on the scene, her face a mask of confusion as she saw Agent Thorne already cuffing the other Ortega men. She looked at the scene, the federal agent, the high-powered lawyer, the sputtering flare, and Lila Moreno, covered in grime, helping a sobbing Suri to her feet. Kincaid looked at Lila, not with animosity, but with a new, strange respect. "You didn't run. You didn't hide. You brought in the feds," Kincaid said, her voice low. "You just turned the city's biggest target into the city's biggest victim. You just saved this city's face, Moreno." In the ambulance, the red and blue lights flashing, Lila watched a medic cut away Giovanni's bloody coat and shirt. The vest had stopped the center mass shot. The shoulder wound was a clean through and through. "You came alone," he said, his voice strained with pain as the medic applied pressure. "So did you," she whispered. "You brought a lawyer to a gunfight." "I brought backup," he corrected, his eyes meeting hers. "I just didn't lead with it." He looked at her, the usual guarded mask gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability she had only seen glimpses of. "I was afraid. Lila, when my men lost you at the rivet, when they said you were coming here alone, I was afraid I wouldn't be in time." Lila felt the tremor in her own hands, the adrenaline finally draining, leaving her cold and shaking. She reached out and took his good hand, his fingers, cold from the pier, laced with hers, gripping her tightly. "We're alive, Giovanni," she whispered, her voice thick. "We're alive. There's still time." The pier was secure. Ortega was finished, caught in a federal net Kincaid couldn't touch. Suri was safe, but as Lila sat in the flashing lights holding his hand, she knew that while the violence was over, the central mystery remained. She had seen him bleed, but she still didn't understand why. 12 long months ago, he had ever started to care. 1 week later, the New Cambria Mercy Gala was held at the Mars Theater. The restored lobby dripped with Old World gold and New World money. Lila felt like she was in a costume, wearing a simple dark blue dress Rhea Quill had insisted on sending. She was the guest of honor, introduced as a testament to the resilience of a new Cambria mother. She stood near the stage, her hands cold, as Rhea Quill, poised and elegant, stood at the podium. Behind her, a large screen showed the financials of the Sunfield Mercy Trust. Sunfield operates on a simple principle: direct anonymous aid, Rhea explained, her voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. Many of our largest humanitarian grants, especially those concerning emergency housing, are signed off by a single, firewalled administrator, Patron 32. Lila's heart began to hammer. May Kincaid, surprisingly wearing a dress, sidled up to her in the darkness. "Big night, Moreno," Kincaid murmured, not unkindly. "You'll finally know tonight." On stage, the screen flickered, showing a video montage, children who had received medical care, families in new homes, thanking the trust. And then, suddenly, Nico. He was on the screen, sitting in the Rivet 3 kitchen, holding his rocket ship backpack. He looked at the camera, his lisp adorable as he spoke. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you to the person who gave my mommy a warm kitchen so she didn't have to be cold." Lila's hand flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. The lights dimmed. "We have one more speaker," Rhea said. The side curtain opened. Giovanni Speranza walked onto the stage. He wore a crisp black vest over a white shirt, his arm in a discreet black silk sling. The audience buzzed. He looked pale but composed. He walked to the microphone, looked at Lila, and then he looked past her. "I am not the story tonight," he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the theater. "But I want to introduce someone who is—" He turned and helped an elderly woman, frail and leaning on a cane, to the podium. "This is Mrs. Alvarez. She was a nurse at St. Aurelia's when I was a boy." The old woman squinted into the light. "I remember Gio," she said, her voice thin but clear. "A quiet boy, always watching. His mother. She was very sick. She had a little plastic clip for her hair, peach-colored. She loved it." The nurse looked at Giovanni, who stood rigidly by her side. When she passed, the boy, he found out they were burying her without it. He ran. He went to every shop in the neighborhood, trying to raise money, just a few dollars, to buy a new one, just like it. He wanted her to have something beautiful. She smiled, her eyes finding Lila in the crowd. That was the start of Sunfield. That boy, trying to buy a peach hair clip. He never stopped. Giovanni stood by, his face a mask, his eyes fixed only on Lila. Rhea Quill stepped back to the podium, holding a single, wax-sealed envelope. The G. Yees Trust, which funds Patron 32, was established over 3 years ago, Rhea announced. It has one unbreakable clause: the administrator's identity is sealed, even from us, unless a recipient of the aid, in person, formally requests to know. The privacy of the recipient is prioritized, until they choose otherwise. Lila looked at Giovanni. He was giving her the choice. He did not nod. He did not encourage. He just shook his head, the smallest fraction of an inch. "It is up to you." The entire theater was silent. Lila felt the weight of every eye. Kincaid, Rhea, the audience, Giovanni. This was the final lock. She walked to the steps and climbed onto the stage. She took the microphone from Rhea. Her voice, when she spoke, did not shake. "I ask to know," she said clearly. "My son needs to know. He needs to know who taught him about kindness." Rhea Quill took a letter opener and slit the envelope. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. She read it, then looked at Lila, her professional mask slipping into a genuine, warm smile. The request for 12 months of rent for apartment 4B, Mercer Street, was processed and paid in full by Giovanni Speranza. Rhea looked at the date. The order was time-stamped at 1:03 in the morning. Lila did the math. It was the night her lock was changed, the night he was at the diner, before the drone, before the setup, before he had ever spoken a personal word to her. Rhea continued. A secondary scholarship trust for Nico Moreno was endowed by the same administrator, 1 day later, before he ever visited her home. The knot was untied. It was not a trap. It was not a down payment. The kindness had come before the love. Lila turned, tears streaming down her face. She walked to Giovanni. He stood, exposed and vulnerable, in the spotlight. "You did the right thing," she whispered, "when you had nothing to gain." He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her tight. "You," he breathed into her hair, "you were always the gain, Lila." They embraced, and as the theater erupted in applause, he kissed her. It was warm, deep, and full of promises, a kiss of arrival, not of passion, and it was perfectly, respectfully seen. The aftermath was quiet. The UIB, represented by Agent Thorne, signed a memorandum protecting Sunfield's charitable status. Ortega's organization, headless, dissolved, the Blue Comet, under Sal's new ownership, had its best week in years. As they drove back to the Rivet, the city dark, Giovanni sat beside her in the back of the sedan. "If one day you want to leave," he whispered, "if this is too much, the door is always open. The trust is yours, no matter what." Lila leaned her head against his shoulder, the one that was not bandaged. "For now, let's just go home. Giovanni, Nico is waiting. He wants us to bring him apple pie." The final scene was in the kitchen at Rivet 3. It was late. Nico, his face smeared with whipped cream, was half asleep at the table. Giovanni, his sling making him clumsy, was carefully cutting a slice of pie. Lila, watching them, smiled. She took the small, peach-colored hair clip he had given her from her purse and hung it on a hook by the refrigerator. A promise. New Cambria was still raining outside, the water blurring the glass, but inside the window, the warm yellow light of the kitchen was a solar system of its own, a place where love had not erased the past. It had just, finally, redefined it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it a boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear it.